Hi, this is Ira. I would like to share several results from Agenetic AI and also the prompts I used. I am currently healing my voice, however, I have learned a lot along the way. Here we go.
All right, let's talk about some of the most powerful, most elegant, and most influential scientific ideas in all of history that turned out to be completely and utterly wrong.
It really makes you think, doesn't it? We like to imagine science as this straight line, always marching forward, always getting closer to the truth. But the reality? The road is absolutely littered with discarded theories that people once believed were as solid as the ground under our feet.
So today, we're going to dive deep into 3 of these epic mistakes. We're talking about ideas that shaped entire civilizations, that guided research for centuries, and in one case, led to absolutely devastating human consequences.
We're going to look at the geocentric model of the universe, the idea that everything revolves around us. We'll explore the theory of a mysterious fire element called phlogiston, and we'll tackle the deeply flawed and dangerous movement of eugenics. We're going to see why people believed in them, how they eventually crumbled, and what their ghosts can teach us today.
So first things first, why did these ideas stick around for so long? Well, the simple answer is that they often made perfect, intuitive sense. They felt right. They were elegant solutions to the huge puzzles of the world. Let's start with geocentrism. For more than 1,500 years, this was the undisputed map of the entire cosmos. It was championed by brilliant thinkers like Aristotle and perfected by Ptolemy, and it put our Earth right at the very heart of everything.
And listen, this wasn't some wild guess. It was based on direct everyday experience. Just go outside and look up. The sun looks like it's circling us, and you don't feel the Earth hurtling through space, do you? Nope. It feels solid, stable, completely still. On top of that, astronomers couldn't see any shift in the positions of the stars, which they figured they would see if the Earth was actually moving. It was simply the most logical explanation with the evidence they had.
Okay, now for another really elegant idea. Phlogiston. Back in the 17th and 18th centuries, chemists were obsessed with a basic question. What is fire? Their answer was a substance they called phlogiston, which comes from the Greek word for burning up. The theory was beautiful in its simplicity. Anything that can burn contains phlogiston.
And what's so cool here is how logical this whole cycle seemed. So you've got wood, right? It's made of 2 things, ash and phlogiston. When you burn it, the phlogiston is released, and that's the fire. What's left behind? The ash. The air soaks up the phlogiston, becoming phlogisticated, which explains why a flame in a sealed jar eventually goes out. The air just can't hold anymore. And to complete the cycle, well, plants suck that phlogiston back out of the air to grow, creating new fuel. It was this perfect, self-contained system that explained fire, rust, and even life itself.
But elegant ideas can also be unbelievably dangerous. In the late 19th and early 20th centuries, the eugenics movement took hold, especially in the United States. It was sold as a progressive scientific way to improve society. The goal was to literally manage human evolution, applying the same principles of animal breeding to people.
This quote, it just lays it all bare. It shows how this movement was not about some abstract, objective science. It was fueled by deep-seated social anxieties. This line from Charles Davenport, a leader of the American movement, makes it crystal clear that eugenics was really just a pseudo-scientific excuse for pre-existing racial and class biases, particularly fears about new immigrants coming from Southern and Eastern Europe.
So you have these powerful, totally dominant theories. What happens next? Well, reality has a way of fighting back. New evidence starts to pop up, evidence that just doesn't fit the puzzle anymore. For geocentrism, one of the first major cracks appeared in 1610. Using his brand new telescope, Galileo Galilei pointed it at the planet Venus. Now, the old Ptolemaic model predicted that, from our viewpoint, Venus should only ever look like a crescent or a new phase. But what Galileo saw was incredible. Venus went through a full set of phases just like our moon does. This simple, direct observation was completely impossible if Venus was orbiting the Earth. It only made sense if both Earth and Venus were orbiting the Sun. The phlogiston theory also ran into a huge problem, one you could discover with something as simple as a scale.
Think about it. This is the crucial question. If burning something means it loses phlogiston, then the stuff left over, the ash or rust, it has to be lighter, right? But chemists kept finding that when they burned certain metals, the resulting material was actually heavier. How on earth can something lose a substance and gain weight? People tried to explain it away with crazy ideas, like maybe phlogiston had negative mass. But that contradiction was a fatal wound to the theory.
With eugenics, the cracks weren't just in the data. They were in its horrifying human impact, an impact that was legalized at the highest levels. This infamous line comes from Supreme Court Justice Oliver Wendell Holmes, Jr., in the majority opinion for the 1927 case, Buck v. Bell. With these words, the court gave Virginia the right to forcibly sterilize a young woman named Carrie Buck because she was deemed feeble-minded.
But here is the devastating truth that eventually came out. Carrie Buck was not an imbecile. She'd been put in an institution to cover up the fact that she'd been raped. And her daughter? Also of average intelligence. The so-called hereditary feeble-mindedness used to justify sterilizing her was a complete and total fabrication. The science was a sham, a weapon used to enforce social control.
So what happens when the evidence against a theory becomes so overwhelming you just can't ignore it anymore? You don't just get a small correction, you get a revolution. A complete paradigm shift that changes everything about how we see the world.
The fall of geocentrism wasn't one single event. It was a cascade of discoveries over 150 years. First, Copernicus comes along and proposes the sun-centered model. Then Galileo sees the visual proof with his own eyes. Then Kepler figures out that the planets move in ellipses, not perfect circles. And finally, Newton's theory of gravity comes along and explains the physics of why it all works. The old universe was just taken apart piece by piece.
For phlogiston, the revolution came from a brilliant chemist named Antoine Lavoisier. He realized that the mystery of the weight gain wasn't a paradox at all. He argued that burning is not the release of some invisible thing. No, it's the rapid combination of a substance with a gas from the air, a gas he eventually named oxygen. And just like that, everything clicked. Metals got heavier because they were literally bonding with oxygen from the air. It was simple, powerful, and, most importantly, correct.
The overthrow of eugenics' mainstream science, though, came from a much, much darker place. The American movement, with its sterilization laws and racial theories, became a direct inspiration for Nazi Germany. American eugenicists actually praised Hitler's programs in the beginning. It was only after the full, unimaginable horror of the Nazi regime was revealed after World War II that the movement in the U.S. was profoundly and permanently discredited. Its scientific bankruptcy was laid bare by its horrifying logical conclusion.
So why are we digging up all these old, wrong ideas? Because their stories hold absolutely crucial lessons for us, right here, right now, as we try to navigate our own complex scientific world.
So what are the big takeaways? Well, first, what feels like common sense can be totally misleading. The Earth feels still, but it's flying through space. Second, powerful ideas that call themselves science can actually be built on prejudice, not just data, like we saw with eugenics. But maybe the most important lesson is that science isn't some book of unchanging facts. It's a process, and its real power, its real genius, is its built-in ability to find its own mistakes and correct itself over time.
And this is not just ancient history. The source material for this explainer makes a really powerful point. You could argue we're in a new eugenics era right now. Technologies like CRISPR gene editing, IVF with genetic screening, prenatal DNA testing, they give us an unprecedented level of control over the human gene pool. We are facing those same fundamental questions about what makes someone fit or unfit, but this time with tools that are infinitely more powerful.
And that brings us right back to where we started. When you look at the absolute certainty people had that the Earth was the center of everything, it forces us to ask a humbling question. Which of our own firmly held beliefs, our modern truths, might one day seem just as ridiculously wrong? The lesson from all this isn't that science is flawed or untrustworthy. It's that we have to be forever willing to question, even our most cherished ideas.